The radio came alive at 2:47, not with words at first, just static, the kind that carries weight before it carries sound. Then a voice low-controlled bleeding at the edges in the way voices bleed when the person behind them has already spent everything they had on staying calm. Phantom actual. Beckett is down. I say again, Beckett is down. Enemy has three-side coverage. We are combat ineffective. We have maybe 8 minutes before they finish us. 8 minutes. One rifle on a ridge no one was supposed to reach, and the last person anyone at FOB Sandridge would have sent to pick it up. This is that story. 6 months earlier, the desert looked like it was trying to forget it existed. FOB Sandridge had in a basin between two ridgelines that offered no shade, no comfort, and no strategic beauty. It was a place built for function, low concrete structures, chain-link perimeters, dust that worked its way into everything within 48 hours of arrival. The kind of dust that got into your lungs and stayed there. The kind that made coffee taste like the ground itself had given up on flavor as a concept. Private Elena Voss had been breathing that dust for 173 days. She knew the exact number because she kept a small tally on the inside of her locker door. Not out of misery, out of precision. She was the kind of person who tracked things. Inventory counts, delivery schedules, the weight difference between a case of 5.56 standard issue and match grade .300 Winchester Magnum. She tracked things because things that went untracked eventually went wrong. That was the first lesson she had learned in logistics. It was also the first lesson she had learned in life, though she would not have said it that way. She was 24 years old. She had qualified expert marksman at the top of her basic training class, a fact that appeared in her file and nowhere else buried under the more prominent notation that followed it. A training officer named Sergeant First Class Durbin had written in formal language that left no room for appeal, that while Voss demonstrated exceptional technical aptitude with small arms, her psychological profile indicated she was unsuited for direct combat operations. Too analytical, too prone to hesitation under simulated pressure. Elena had read that evaluation once, accepted it, and filed it the way she filed everything she could not immediately act on. That was her nature. She did not argue with closed doors. She found the ones that were open and walked through them. The door that had opened for her was logistics. She was good at it, genuinely good, the kind of good that made things run smoothly without anyone noticing the effort behind it. She organized ammunition manifests that other personnel had left in chaos. She caught errors in supply requisitions before they became shortages. She triple-checked loadouts for operations that the operators themselves sometimes treated as routine. Nobody thanked her for it. That was fine. She had not enlisted to be thanked. Phantom Shadow occupied a different world within the same fence line. 12 operators, each one chosen through a selection process that had broken men with twice the physical gifts and half the mental fortitude. They moved through FOB Sandridge with the ease of people who had stopped being impressed by difficulty. They ate at the same tables as everyone else. They used the same latrines, the same showers, the same water that tasted faintly of chlorine and heat. But there was a density to them, as though gravity applied more forcefully to people who had made enough peace with dying to stop letting it interfere with their work. Elena had spent 6 months learning to read them by silhouette. Captain Elliot Strand walked like he owned the ground he stood on. Not arrogantly, he was not an arrogant man. He moved through space as though he had already mapped every contingency within it and made his peace with all of them. He was 41 years old, had been in combat on 3 continents, and carried the kind of quiet that comes from having run out of things to prove. Master Sergeant Cole Harker was different. Harker had been called Drift since his second deployment, a call sign that fit him in ways that required knowing him to understand. He drifted through operations the way smoke moves through a room. You looked away, and he was somewhere else. He was 44 years old, built with the economy of someone who had long ago discarded everything unnecessary, and he had a way of looking at people that felt less like assessment and more like inventory. He was not warm. He had not been warm in years. Elena had concluded early on that whatever warmth he had once possessed had been paid out in installments over deployments he never discussed with anyone. Staff Sergeant Owen Beckett was the one people talked about. 200 confirmed kills. An operational record cited in training documents at facilities Beckett himself had never visited. He carried his custom rifle the way other men carried a preferred hand tool, not with reverence exactly, but with the casual ownership of something that had become part of his body. He was 38 years old. He was not large. He was not physically imposing in any obvious way. What he had was stillness, a complete interior quiet that only appeared in people who had decided at some fundamental level that panic was a luxury they could not afford. Elena had never spoken to him. Until the Thursday 3 weeks before everything changed. She was organizing the specialized ammunition delivery in the supply bay, a narrow, poorly lit room that smelled of gun oil and cardboard, when Beckett appeared in the doorway. No announcement, no knock. He simply materialized as operators sometimes did, as though movement itself was optional for them. He looked at the cases she was cataloging, specifically at the .300 Winchester Magnum match grade she had set apart from the standard issue. "You know the difference between those and the standard?" he asked. She did not look up from her clipboard. "Match grade has tighter tolerances on the case neck, more consistent powder charge. The projectile is seated to within 1,000th of an inch. At 800 meters, that consistency translates to roughly a half-minute of angle improvement in grouping." She marked a count. "At 1,000 meters, it can be the difference between a hit and a miss on a man-sized target." Silence. She looked up. Beckett was watching her with an expression she could not immediately classify. It was not surprise. It was something more like a man updating a calculation he had already run once and assumed was final. "Most supply runners don't know that," he said. "I read the technical specifications." "Most supply runners don't do that either." He picked up the ammunition case, checked the seal, set it back down. The interaction lasted perhaps 45 seconds. He was gone before she had decided whether it constituted a conversation. 2 words followed her out of that room. "Good work." He had not said them. He had not said anything that sounded like them. But the recalibration in his expression, the shift from indifference to acknowledgement, carried the same weight. In a place where she had been furniture for 153 days, it landed with the force of something larger than it was. She did not mention it to anyone. Private First Class Faye Murdoch was signals intelligence, which meant she spent her days listening to things other people did not know were being said. She was 26 from a small town in western Pennsylvania, and she had the social gift of making people feel seen without making them feel examined. She was the only person on FOB Sandridge who used Elena's first name consistently. Not Voss, not the supply girl. Elena. It was a small thing. On a base where small things were the only currency that mattered, it was considerable. "Something's moving," Faye said one evening, settling beside Elena on the concrete steps outside the supply bay. The sun was finishing its business with the horizon, and the desert was cooling with the dramatic speed that deserts cool. No transition, just heat, and then the absence of it. "Radio traffic has been strange all week, encrypted channels we don't usually see active. Command has been in that tent for 6 hours straight. Operations always have pre-mission noise." "Not like this," Faye kept her voice low. "Strand requisitioned ammunition for a 12-man team that could sustain contact for 2 days minimum. Harker signed off on a loadout I have never seen before." She paused. "And Beckett had 3 cases of your match grade brought directly to his quarters this afternoon." Elena stored the observation without showing it. "Stay low," Faye said. "Whatever this is, it's big." The briefing happened at 1700 hours. Elena was not invited. She was never invited. But she could see the shapes through the command tent canvas as she crossed the compound on a supply run, 12 silhouettes in various postures of attention and calculation. Strand at the front, Harker to his left, arms crossed. Beckett in the back, already somewhere else in his mind. She caught fragments through the canvas, not because she was trying to. "Intelligence estimates are contested, sir. If the force composition is battalion strength, mission parameters don't change based on estimates. If we walk into a kill box with 12 men, then Strand's voice quieter than the others, but carrying more weight. We've been in kill boxes before. We plan, we adapt, we execute. Questions. No more fragments after that." Elena finished her supply run and returned to the depot. She had learned early in her deployment that the distance between what she felt and what she showed was a skill worth cultivating. Visible concern from support personnel made commanders nervous, and nervous commanders made poor decisions. So she sorted ammunition. She moved equipment. She waited for 2,100 hours and the sound of engines pulling away from the eastern perimeter. She watched them go from a shadow beside the motor pool. 4 armored vehicles. The operators loaded in with economy, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Beckett was last. He paused at the vehicle door as though checking a final calculation in his head. Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark interior. The convoy rolled out at exactly 2100. The taillights disappeared beyond the perimeter wire. Elena stood in the silence for a moment longer than she needed to. She went back to the supply bay and began reorganizing a shelf that did not need to be reorganized. The attack on FOB Sandridge began at 0214 hours. Not the alarm, not a drill. The sound was wrong, not the distant percussion of outgoing fire, but the intimate concussive thud of something landing close. Too close. She was moving before the second explosion. Boots, tactical vest, M4 carbine, helmet, 30 seconds from horizontal to ready, because hesitation had a cost she had spent enough time near this team to understand. Outside, the base had transformed into controlled chaos. Personnel running to defensive positions. Officers shouting coordinates into radios. Tracers stitching the darkness from the eastern perimeter in long, angry lines. The radio on her vest erupted with overlapping voices. Contact east, multiple hostiles. Sector 3 needs reinforcement. Western wall breach. I say again, Western wall has been breached. Where is our air support? She ran to the supply depot. Sergeant Hayes, perpetually sunburned, perpetually operating one register below. Panic shoved a secondary radio into her hands before she reached the door. Command frequency, stay on it, emergency ammunition to the perimeter. She clipped the radio to her vest and began pulling crates. For 90 minutes she ran. Supply point to Sector 2, Sector 2 to the medical tent back to the depot. She moved through the base while bullets cracked overhead and burning vehicles produced a smell thick, chemical, permanent that she would never mistake for anything else. She did not stop to evaluate whether she was afraid. She moved through the fear the way she moved through every difficult thing, by treating it as weather rather than obstacle. The attack had a shape she recognized from the operational planning documents she had processed for months. Simultaneous pressure on 3 points. Probing attacks on the western wall to draw resources. Main effort at the eastern gate. Sophisticated. Deliberate. Not opportunistic. Whoever had planned this had known exactly where the gaps were. At 0247, the secondary radio changed. Phantom actual. Beckett is down. I say again, Beckett is down. Enemy has 3-side coverage. We are combat ineffective. We have maybe 8 minutes before they finish us. Elena stopped moving. The crate in her hands weighed 40 pounds. She set it on the ground without knowing she had done it. Harker's voice came back on the particular compression of a man spending his last reserves of control. All stations Phantom requesting immediate QRF to grid November 7426. Any available element, please respond. Colonel Warren Pruitt's voice came through, flat, measured, the sound of arithmetic being performed on human lives. Phantom actual, this is Sandridge 6. QRF is not available. Base is under active attack. We cannot detach. Execute, escape, and evade. I say again, execute, escape, and evade, and return to base when able. Sandridge 6, we have wounded. Beckett is down. We cannot move under current fire. Phantom actual, I understand you are on your own. Sandridge 6 out. Silence on the frequency, then very quietly, copy that. Phantom out. Elena stood in the darkness with the crate on the ground beside her and the sound of the eastern attack filling the distance. She was support personnel. She was logistics. Her training officer had written in formal language that she was psychologically unsuited for direct combat operations. These were the facts. She walked past them. The motor pool was quiet on the northern edge of the compound, while the eastern perimeter absorbed attention. The duty officer's station was empty. The keys hung on the board inside. She knew which ones fit which vehicles the way she knew every inventory number in the depot. She took the keys to the light ATV. She checked her weapon. She pulled the vehicle out of the motor pool at a crawl lights off and drove toward the eastern perimeter gate. The gate guard was young, wide-eyed, not yet old enough to have developed the reflex that tells experienced soldiers when something is catastrophically wrong. Supply run, she said, direct from Sandridge 6. He waved her through. She drove into the darkness. The grid coordinate from Harker's transmission, November 7426, she had already converted to a bearing in her head. 15 kilometers northeast, rocky valley terrain, elevated ground on 3 sides. She had processed enough operational maps to read terrain the way some people read faces. She drove with no lights, navigating by the night vision scope on her M4 in the GPS strapped to the handlebars. The desert at night had a quality of complete indifference, not hostile exactly. It simply was. Rocks and darkness and the occasional scrub brush that had decided to survive in conditions that argued against it. She did not think about what she was doing. Thinking about it would have meant weighing it, and weighing it would have meant stopping, and stopping was not something her body was willing to consider. She had made the decision somewhere in the darkness between the supply depot and the motor pool, without ceremony, without deliberation, the way you make the decisions that matter before the rational part of your mind can organize an objection. The radio continued its grim narration as she drove. Two more down, falling back to secondary position. They have eyes on us every time we move. Then Beckett needs evac. Hit bad. We cannot hold position. She pushed the ATV harder. She saw the valley from 800 meters out from a ridge that gave her a line of sight down into the basin, and what she saw stopped her breathing for a moment. Tracer fire cutting through darkness like angry light. Explosions blooming orange against rock faces. The tactical signatures of a force that had positioned itself with operational competence. Not militia, not opportunists. Professional soldiers who had been told exactly where to be and exactly when to be there. In the center, in a cluster of defensive positions showing up as small sparks of return fire, a group of men were dying by degrees. She killed the engine and moved to a rock outcrop rifle up, scanning through the night vision scope. She could see Phantom's position. She could see the eastern ridge where muzzle flashes appeared at regular methodical intervals, not suppressive but precise. A trained counter-sniper working his way through targets with patience and discipline. Without Beckett, there was no answer to him. Every time Phantom tried to move, those methodical flashes stopped them. She saw the rifle. On a rock shelf 50 meters from Phantom's position, half visible in the shadows. Abandoned when the team had been forced back from their previous line. Beckett's rifle. She knew its profile from every specification she had cataloged. She was already moving down the slope before she had formed a complete thought about it. The infiltration took everything she had, crawling through rock and darkness. Each meter a negotiation between urgency and silence. Enemy positions close enough that she could hear voices, actual human voices, the sound of people who believed they were winning and had not yet been told otherwise. She pressed into the ground when a sweep light passed 30 meters overhead. She counted to 20 before moving again. She reached Phantom's perimeter on her stomach and was yanked through cover by a hand on her collar before she could identify whose it was. Harker. His face in the darkness was unreadable. Blood on his cheek from a fragment wound. Eyes that had moved past fear into the territory beyond it, where the only thing remaining was the math of survival. "What are you doing here?" His voice barely above a whisper, but the intensity absolute. "I saw the eastern ridge." Sniper. Counter-sniper position. "He's what's keeping you pinned." "We know what's pinning us." He released her collar, looked at her M4. "That doesn't explain why a supply specialist crawled through active enemy contact." "Where is the rifle?" He looked at her the way a man looks when he is calculating odds he has already run and found insufficient. "Rock shelf, 50 meters north. We had to leave it when they pushed us back." "I can reach it." "You have never fired that rifle." "I've read the spec sheet." "That is not the same thing." "I know." Strand materialized from the smoke face blackened with soot eyes moving from Harker to Elena with the rapid calculation of a man who had learned to make decisions faster than their consequences. "Who is she?" "Supply specialist Voss. Came in on her own." Strand looked at her the way an engineer looks at an unexpected variable determining whether it is useful or catastrophic. "You've seen the sniper position. Eastern ridge. Elevated. He's got a spotter. The intervals on his fire pattern are too consistent for solo work. That's why you can't find him between shots. He's repositioning after each one to a pre-planned secondary." A burst of automatic fire tore across the rock above them. Someone at the far end of the defensive line called out a contact bearing. Strand did not flinch. "That rifle is zeroed for Beckett," he said. "Different hold, different eye relief, different everything." "Yes, sir." "At 800 meters, in the dark, with a weapon you've never fired, against a trained counter-sniper who has this position already sighted." "Yes, sir." Strand looked at Harker. Some unspoken calculation passed between them, the kind that happens between people who have worked together long enough to complete each other's arithmetic. "Get her to the rifle," Strand said. "Holst Brigham, suppressive fire on my mark. 30 seconds. Harker looked at Elena one final time. He did not offer reassurance. He did not tell her she could do this. Those were things you said to people you were trying to comfort, and comfort was not a resource Harker kept in inventory. He said, "Don't miss." Then he keyed his radio, and the desert opened up around her, and she ran. 50 meters felt like 500. She ran low and fast while Phantom's guns hammered at enemy positions and forced heads down. Bullets kicked the earth around her. Something passed close enough to her left that the displaced air registered before the sound did. She did not slow. She did not reconsider. The decision had been made, and unmade decisions had a cost she was not willing to pay. She reached the rifle, went to ground behind the rock shelf, pulled it toward her. Beckett's rifle. The custom work alone had taken a specialist armorer 6 weeks. The Schmidt and Bender scope ran a magnification range that could make a man's face readable at a kilometer. She felt the weight of it settle into her hands heavier than she had expected, balanced differently than anything she had held before. Beckett's cheek weld would be wrong for her. His eye relief would require adjustment. His zero had been set for his body, his breathing, his specific hold. None of that changed what the next few minutes required. She extended the bipod, settled into the prone, found a cheek weld that was close enough, and adjusted the scope with hands that were steady in a way she could not fully account for. She opened her eye to the optics. The eastern ridge materialized in crystalline detail. She looked for the pattern. A professional counter sniper returned to the same sight line after each shot because the sight line was what made him effective. You found the sight line, then you waited for the shadow in it. She watched. She controlled her breathing the way she controlled everything difficult, by finding the rhythm underneath the noise and following it. Not the mechanical technique from basic training, something quieter than that, something that had no name she knew. Harker's voice in her earpiece, "You have 90 seconds before they breach the south position. Whatever you're doing, do it now." She watched the sight line. A shadow shifted barely a fraction of movement, a repositioning for angle. Human. She adjusted for wind from the dust movement she had clocked on the ridgeline during her approach. Corrected elevation from what she had memorized of the spec sheet, not calculation. Something closer to recognition, the way a number you have seen 1,000 times appears immediately correct or immediately wrong. She exhaled to the bottom of her breath. In the space between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. The recoil was massive, harder than she had anticipated. The stock drove into her shoulder and blurred her sight picture for one full second. When it cleared, the eastern ridge was still. No muzzle flash, no movement in the shadow position. She held the scope on it for 3 full seconds, searching. Nothing. Harker's voice came through, changed, not dramatically, not with the movie version of emotion, just very slightly less compressed than his baseline. She got him. Phantom the sniper is down. Move. Move now. The battlefield shifted. Without the counter-sniper controlling their movement, Phantom's operators surged forward with the sudden violence of a tide that had been held back and finally released. The precise coordination that had been strangling them fractured instantly. Momentum reversed. Elena lay behind the rock shelf with the rifle still against her shoulder and the recoil still echoing through her body. She had taken a human life. The understanding of it arrived not as emotion, but as fact, clean, permanent, irreversible. A person who had been alive 10 seconds ago was no longer because she had made a decision and executed it correctly. The emotion would come later. She could feel it waiting somewhere behind the operational present patient, ready to collect when the situation allowed. "Voss," Strand's voice in her ear. "Secondary threat south. Displaced now." And she chambered a fresh round, picked up the rifle, and moved toward whatever came next. The enemy fighter came around the boulder from the south, moving at a run, rifle already coming up, and no time for distance or the clean separation of a scope. She drew her sidearm and fired 3 times before her arm had fully extended. He dropped 2 feet in front of her, close enough that she could see his face. She stood there for 1 full second, at the specific stillness of a person from whom everything had been suddenly removed. At the difference between this and the shot through the scope, how the scope made it geometry and proximity made it something that had no clean category. She filed it the way she filed things she could not yet process. Harker appeared from the darkness at her left, rifle up, scanning. He saw the body. He saw her. "Leg," he said, looking at the blood soaking through her uniform. She had not noticed it. "Through and through, I think." "Move." She moved. The medical vehicle smelled of antiseptic and the specific exhaustion of people who had operated at maximum capacity for hours and were now discovering what that had cost their bodies. Corporal Liam Holst worked on Elena's leg with the efficiency of someone who had long ago made peace with the body as a problem set. He confirmed her field assessment through and through missed the femoral artery by approximately 2 inches and dressed it with the compressed precision of a man who had done this often enough to do it correctly on the first attempt. Across the vehicle, Beckett lay unconscious on the opposite bench, hooked to an IV, breathing in the shallow, careful way of someone whose body was doing all its work in the dark. His face, even unconscious, held that interior stillness she had first noticed in the supply bay. As though nothing external could reach whatever was at his center, she did not let go of the rifle. Holst finished the bandage and moved to check Beckett's vitals. Elena looked at the vehicle's ceiling and listened to the engine and thought about the face at 2 meters. About the way death announced itself not with drama, but with a sudden and complete absence. She noted the absence of what she had expected to feel, the horror. The guilt, the immediate psychological consequence that training materials described. Instead of flatness, an inventory space where a reaction was supposed to be temporarily empty, waiting to be filled. She understood in a detached way that this was not the end of the conversation, only its beginning. 9 confirmed, Calloway said from the front, relaying to command. He was signals his place in the vehicle was the radio, not the rifle. Voss 9 confirmed kills, still assessing. She did not respond. 9 was a number. Numbers went in the inventory. Colonel Warren Pruitt's office at dawn. The light came through the east-facing window at an angle that made everything look simultaneously harsher and more exhausted. Pruitt looked like a man who had spent the night making decisions he would carry for years, and had done it often enough to know that the weight did not diminish with experience, only became more familiar. He was not alone. The woman sitting to his left wore civilian clothes in a deliberately neutral color, the kind of neutrality that was itself a statement. She had the stillness of someone who had spent years learning to disappear in rooms, and the attentiveness of a person who had been listening carefully for a very long time. Her name was Sandra Vance, Defense Intelligence Agency. Vance set a folder on the desk without opening it. When she spoke, her voice had been stripped of warmth, not by coldness, but by precision, every word carrying only its own weight, nothing extra. Specialist Voss, your personnel file indicates no advanced marksmanship training beyond standard qualification. No combat experience prior to last night. No formal instruction in counter-sniper operations. That's correct. And yet, she opened the folder. Inside was a ballistics report Elena had never seen. Our technical team recovered 4 spent casings from your position. The trajectory reconstruction indicates point-of-aim consistency that is, according to our analysis, inconsistent with 2 years of supply duty and 1 expert qualification course. Elena said nothing. How did you shoot like that? I watched Beckett on the range during his downtime. I read the technical specifications. I paid attention when no one was watching me pay attention. When the situation required it, I used what I had absorbed. You trained yourself. In my own time. Secretly. Quietly. There is no regulation against studying ballistics manuals. Vance looked at her the way a person looks at a lock they have not yet found the key for. Has anyone outside of the U.S. military ever provided you with instruction in long-range marksmanship contracted personnel? Private organizations? Anyone not in your official service record? No. Have you ever been approached by a foreign intelligence service? The implication arrived without packaging. No, and Elena kept her voice level. I am not a spy agent, Vance. Nobody who is one says they are. Vance did not smile. I'm not accusing you, specialist. I'm trying to account for a statistical impossibility. 9 confirmed kills, a counter-sniper engagement at 800 meters with an unfamiliar weapon system. Suppression of an enemy element our analysts describe as having professional military training. She paused. These results do not come from someone who read technical manuals in her spare time. Pruitt, who had been silent, cleared his throat. Agent Vance. Colonel, this specialist disobeyed a direct order, drove into an active combat zone, and kept 12 operators alive who would otherwise not be here. I am prepared to address the regulations she violated. I am not prepared to frame what she did as a problem. Vance looked at him, then at Elena. I'm asking about capabilities, she said, because capability doesn't appear from nowhere. She closed the folder. We will continue this conversation. She left without waiting for a dismissal. Elena sat in the chair across from Pruitt. He studied her for a long moment. You are going to have more of those conversations, he said. Get comfortable with them. He pulled a transfer document from his desk drawer. You are being reassigned from supply duty effective immediately. Command wants a full skills assessment. Beckett will be in recovery for weeks. We have a mission window in 72 hours that requires a designated marksman. He looked at her directly. I'm giving you 36 hours with Harker. After that, you tell me if you can do the job. Yes, sir. And Voss. He held her gaze. There are 14 months in your service record that appear to have been modified. Not recently. Before your enlistment. Someone with top secret clearance reached into your history before you ever walked through the gates of basic training. He set the document on the desk. I don't know what it means, but someone went to considerable trouble to ensure you did not know about it. Elena absorbed this without showing it. I'll look into it, sir. It was the only answer that moved the situation forward. The range was empty when Harker arrived at 0800. He set up targets at 4 distances, 300 meters, 600, 800, and beyond the far berm at a distance he did not name. He checked the rifle with the systematic care of someone who had been let down by equipment before and was not interested in being let down again. When he was satisfied, he set it on the table between them. "Before we start," he said. She waited. "Last night, the counter sniper. Walk me through your hold," she told him. The wind estimation from the dust movement on her approach, the elevation correction from the specification sheet, the decision to wait for the shadow in the sightline. When she finished, Harker was quiet. "The dust rid was right," he said. "The elevation correction was 2 milliradians low. You made the shot anyway because the target mass was large enough to absorb the error at that range." He picked up the rifle and held it out to her. "That is not skill. That is luck built on a technical foundation. We are going to turn it into skill." She took the rifle. "What I am about to teach you is not about the weapon," he said. "The weapon is mechanical. It does what physics tells it to do. What I am teaching you is how to understand the environment thoroughly enough that when you pull the trigger, you are not guessing. You are confirming something you already know." He walked her to the 300-meter position. "Wind is your primary variable beyond 500 meters. Not distance, not elevation. Wind. And wind at distance is not one thing, it is 3 or 4 different things layered at different altitudes, and the round travels through all of them." He pointed to a series of small flags positioned along the range at varying heights. "Tell me what you see." She looked. The flags at ground level barely moved. The flags at mid-range pulled steadily left. The flag at the far end whipped back and forth. Variable, different speeds at different altitudes. Wind shear. You cannot calculate for that. The math takes too long, and conditions change before you finish. What you do instead is wait. He settled in behind the rifle and went completely still. She watched him. His breathing became almost imperceptible. The flags along the range shifted and changed, and he did not move. Then for perhaps 3 seconds, they aligned a brief convergence when the layers briefly agreed. He fired. Center mass. "The environment has a rhythm," he said, standing. "Your job is to find the rhythm and enter it at the right moment. Not force it. Find it." He stepped back. "Your turn." She settled into the prone, watched the flags, waited. She was not patient by nature. She was efficient, which was a different thing. Efficiency wanted to act. Patience required holding efficiency still and letting the moment determine itself. It was the hardest 30 seconds she had spent at a range. The flags aligned. She fired. Center mass. Harker said nothing. He moved the target to 800 meters. They worked through the morning, this way, methodical, nearly silent Harker, correcting with economy. One observation per error, then forward. He did not reassure her. He did not praise her. He treated her the way a craftsman treats something being forged with attention and expectation rather than sentiment. By midday, she was putting consistent rounds at 800 meters in variable conditions. Harker called a water break. She sat against the range wall and looked at her hands. The calluses from trigger work were forming over the ones from supply crates. She thought about what Pruitt had told her. 14 months. Someone with top secret clearance. A deletion in her own history that she had not known existed. She drank her water and went back to the rifle. At 1700 hours, 3 things happened that would determine the next 72 hours of everyone's life at FOB Sandridge. The weapons technical team submitted their analysis of equipment recovered from the enemy positions in the valley. Harker read the report once and then found Strand and handed it over without speaking. The report's conclusion was precise and cold. The weapons recovered from 11 of 14 confirmed enemy positions were American manufacture. Not surplus, not black market, not aged Soviet equipment that had passed through a dozen hands over decades. Current manufacture with serial numbers intact, produced 14 months earlier. Cross-referenced with the Army Logistics Database, the serial numbers traced to a distribution manifest from a regional supply depot 18 months prior. The manifest carried 22 signatures. 22 people had handled or authorized the movement of weapons that had ended up pointed at American soldiers. Strand read the report. He set it down on the table in the operations room. "Someone did not just sell information," he said. "They have been building an arsenal. Whoever it is has access to both intelligence and supply chain authorization," Harker said. "That is not someone operating from the margins. That is someone with rank with clearance, with enough time and position to move equipment without triggering flags." They looked at the list of 22 signatures. "Find out who," Strand said. "The second thing that happened at 1700 hours was that Beckett regained consciousness." Holst reported it without drama. Beckett was alert, stable, asking orientation questions in the specific way of someone calibrating their position on the spectrum between alive and functional. The answers he received placed him closer to the middle of that spectrum than the far end, which was a better result than the Valley had been offering. He asked one question Holst had not anticipated. "The rifle. Where is it?" Holst told him. Beckett was quiet for a moment. "She'd better not have scratched it." The third thing that happened was that Faye Murdoch found Elena in her bunk at 2200, 2 hours before the pre-mission briefing, sitting in the dark with her back against the wall and her eyes open and the rifle case on the floor in front of her. Faye sat down without asking permission. She did not ask how Elena was doing. She did not reach for any of the standard language people produce when they are near someone sitting in the dark, processing something that does not have a clean shape yet. She just sat. After a while, Elena said, "There was one at 2 meters. Faye did not ask her to explain. "With the rifle, the distance makes it abstract. You are looking through glass at a geometry problem. The solution is mechanical. But up close, she stopped, started again. "I need you to understand that I know it was necessary, and I still cannot stop seeing his face." Faye said, "I know. Does that go away?" Faye was quiet for a long moment. She was signals intelligence. She heard things from the outside in radio traffic in the gaps between transmissions where something had gone wrong. She had a different relationship with violence than the people who performed it. "I think it goes somewhere else," she said finally. "I do not think it goes away." Elena nodded. They sat in the dark together until 2345, when Elena got up, checked her equipment, and went to the mission briefing. The briefing was in the operations room with the door closed and no recording equipment running. Strand laid out the intelligence on the target. Enemy command element designated Wraith, the network responsible for coordinating both the ambush on Phantom Shadow and the simultaneous attack on FOB Sandridge. Signal intelligence had tracked their communications to a compound 14 kilometers northwest. The weapons pipeline traced through distribution nodes that Wraith's network controlled. He had to be removed before he could reorganize. The assault element is Strand leading. Harker Holst, a demolitions operator named Brigham, who had spent 12 years doing things in places that did not appear on maps, and a breacher named Reardon, who talked about all his deployments in the same flat tone he used to discuss weather. The sixth slot was Elena. Her role position on the ridgeline overlooking the compound's northwestern approach neutralized the 2 enemy sniper nests intelligence had identified before the assault element moved. One nest on the northeastern corner building, one on the southwestern rooftop. She had loaded 2 partial magazines from what remained after the Valley, 14 rounds of match-grade total. Not enough for sustained engagement. Enough if she was precise for exactly what needed to happen. The compound had 2 sniper nests, a reinforcement route to the east, and an unknown number of personnel who would become significantly more motivated once the shooting started. Harker looked at her across the table when Strand finished. "Questions." She had one question. She kept it to herself. The question was whether she was ready. The answer was that she did not know. She had 36 hours of instruction and 2 days of experience she had not been prepared for. Whether that was enough depended on variables she could not calculate in advance. "No questions," she said. "We insert at 2,300, Strand said. The helicopter set them down 4 kilometers from the compound in a desert that had decided at this hour to be completely indifferent to human concerns. Elena moved with the team through darkness, the wound in her leg requesting attention with each step. She acknowledged it the way she acknowledged all physical information, noted filed not acted on until the situation permitted. She peeled off from the main element at the designated point and moved alone toward her position. Alone was a different condition than she had anticipated. With the team around her, there had been a distributed weight to the situation. Other minds processing the same environment, other training running parallel to hers. Alone on the ridgeline with the compound resolving in her night vision 800 meters below, all of it fell to her. She settled into position, extended the bipod, found her cheek weld, breathed. Through the scope, the compound resolved into details. Guard rotations, patrol patterns. And there on the northeastern corner, building the signature of a prepared sniper position behind a sandbag emplacement. A second position on the southwestern rooftop, more exposed but with better angles on the approach vectors. She reported both to Strand, received acknowledgement. Then she waited. The waiting was where everything compressed by action began to expand. She thought about the face at 2 meters, about the gap in her service record, about Faye saying, "I think it goes somewhere else," about Beckett asking where the rifle was before asking about himself. Then she stopped thinking and watched the compound. Strand's voice, all elements set, Overwatch cleared to engage on my mark. She centered the crosshairs on the northeastern position, a shadow behind sandbags, the weight shift of a person rather than equipment. 3, 2, 1 mark. She fired. The northeastern position went still. She was already moving left, finding the southwestern rooftop. The sniper there had heard the shot. She could see him repositioning, going behind the rooftop parapet, disappearing from her initial line of sight. She searched. Below, the assault element broke from cover and moved toward the gate. Explosive charges detonated with a flash that burned through her night vision for 1 full second. Gunfire. The controlled cadence of Phantom engaged versus the erratic response of a force that had been surprised. She was still searching for the second sniper. The bullet that came for her head missed by 4 inches. She felt the concussive displacement of air before the sound reached her. Instinct threw her sideways, the decision made before she could weigh it. She rolled left, taking the rifle, and came up behind a different rock as the second round struck the position she had just vacated. He was at the water tower. 300 meters past the compound's eastern perimeter, elevated with clear sight lines to every position she might logically occupy on this ridgeline. He had not been in the compound intelligence at all. He had been staged outside it, positioned for exactly this scenario. Professional, patient, waiting for a counter-sniper to reveal herself. She found him in the scope, a shadow behind the water tower's upper housing. 700 meters, moving target, night conditions. A position she had not previously ranged. She fired 3 rounds in a tight pattern around where she estimated his torso to be. One found something. The weapon dropped from his hands. She heard the clatter of it on the external ladder. The shadow slumped. Second position down, she reported. Compound is clear. Copy, we are in. Below, the assault moved through the compound interior. The radio traffic was clipped and professional room clear, threat neutralized, moving to primary objective. She maintained overwatch, scanning the perimeter. Then Calloway's voice from inside. Reinforcements east approach. Count 12, possibly 15. Armed, combat load. Moving fast. She found them in the scope. 12 figures moving in tactical bounds along the eastern approach track. The spacing was wrong for militia, too consistent, too disciplined. These were trained soldiers, and they were approximately 4 minutes from cutting off Phantom's exit. She checked her remaining ammunition. 8 rounds. Overwatch, can you suppress 8 rounds against 12 personnel? Engaging. She fired at the lead element. 1 down. The formation broke into cover positions, the correct trained response in the advance slowed by 90 seconds. She fired twice into the most likely positions. Movement stopped. More cover seeking. Strand's voice. Target eliminated. Wraith is down. Extract in 90 seconds. The reinforcements were moving again. They had identified her approximate position. Fire discipline, shifting rounds, walking up the ridgeline, each correction closer than the last. She fired again. Hit. The formation hesitated. 5 rounds remaining. Extract point in 45 seconds. She moved to a new position 10 meters left still, with angles on the approach track's natural choke point, the narrow gap between rock formations the reinforcements had to pass through. She fired into the near rock face at the gap's entrance. The round struck with enough force that the fragment shower was sufficient to push the lead elements into prone. The advance stopped. 3 rounds remaining. She saw the formation's leader exposing himself to direct the next bound. She fired. He went down. The magazine ran empty on the next pull. She grabbed the rifle and pulled back from the ridgeline without looking for further results. She ran. The helicopter was already at the extract point when she came down the slope, moving at a pace she had not known her body could sustain, leg-burning lungs at capacity, rifle locked against her chest. Behind her, the ridgeline took fire from reinforcements who had recovered and found her last position empty. Harker stood at the helicopter door with his arm extended. She caught it, felt herself pulled aboard with a force that bypassed gravity. The helicopter was climbing before the door had fully closed. Below, the compound burned. The reinforcements were silhouettes arriving too late at a position that had already moved. She collapsed against the bulkhead and put her back to the cold metal and looked at the ceiling. Strand crouched in front of her. His face was dark with soot. You suppressed 12 personnel with 8 rounds, he said. She looked at her hands. The magazines were empty, and her hands were steady, and she did not know yet what that meant about her. I ran out at the end, she said, 3 rounds short of finished. Yes, something careful in Strand's voice. The mission is complete. Wraith is down. The staging compound is destroyed. Everyone on this helicopter is alive. A pause. Because of what you did up there. She looked at him. Who trained you? He asked. Not as Vance had asked it, not as accusation, as a genuine question from a man who had been doing this for 20 years and was encountering something he could not fully account for. She gave him the only answer she had. I genuinely don't know. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood and moved forward to debrief with Harker. Elena sat with the empty rifle and the burning compound falling away below the helicopter and thought about what Faye had said. About things going somewhere else rather than away. About the difference between carrying something and being crushed by it. The lights of FOB Sandridge appeared below. She understood something she had not understood before. She had not become something new in the past 48 hours. She had been placed in conditions where what she already was could no longer be overlooked. The distinction mattered to her in a way she could not yet articulate. FOB Sandridge looked different at dawn after an operation. The same concrete and chain link and dust it had always been. The same generators at the same frequency. The same smell of diesel and institutional coffee and the particular staleness of recycled air in overcrowded spaces. Nothing about the physical compound had changed, but Elena walked through it differently now. Not with the ease she had observed in the phantom operators, that quality of compressed readiness that came from surviving enough to stop being surprised by difficulty. She walked through it with something quieter. The awareness that the world had recalibrated around her in ways she had not requested and could not reverse. Soldiers she had served alongside for 6 months looked at her differently. Some with something that resembled respect. Others with the expression of people who had decided they did not know what to make of a situation and were deferring the question indefinitely. She noted all of it and said nothing. She went to the supply bay out of habit, stood in the doorway. The shelves were exactly as she had left them. The manifests were current and correct. She closed the door and did not go inside. Pruitt summoned her at 0900. Agent Vance was already there in the same neutral clothing with the same quality of stillness. Harker stood against the far wall with his arms crossed and his face working through something he had not yet decided how to act on. Vance placed 3 photographs on the desk. 3 faces, 3 names. 3 people identified as possible sources of the intelligence leak that had sent Phantom Shadow into an ambush and coordinated enemy forces against FOB Sandridge simultaneously. The first photograph was Warrant Officer Pemberton's signals, 26 years of service. The second was Captain Farwell Logistics. The third was Master Sergeant Grant Aldridge. Elena had interacted with all 3 over the course of her deployment. Pemberton she knew by sight and by the frequency with which he mentioned his retirement 14 months away, as though counting days was itself a protective act. Farwell she had worked with on 2 supply coordination efforts, competent, thorough, careful about details in a way she had respected. Aldridge she knew differently. Aldridge was the kind of person a base organized itself around without fully realizing it was doing so. 17 years of service, 3 combat deployments. The kind of man who remembered the names of junior enlisted personnel's family members and asked about them by name. Who stayed late to help with administrative problems that were not his responsibility. Who had told Elena on 2 separate occasions that her work in the supply bay was what kept the operation functional. He had meant it. She had been able to tell the difference by then. She looked at his photograph a beat longer than the others. "The plan is straightforward," Vance said. "We feed each of these 3 individuals a different version of false operational information. Slightly different grid coordinates for a patrol route that Specialist Voss will run tonight. Single operator, minimal overwatch, high-value intelligence target." She looked at Elena. "You are the bait." Elena looked at Pruitt. "Your choice," Pruitt said. "Nobody is ordering you to do this." She looked at the 3 photographs. "When does it start?" Harker from the wall. "It already has." The false information was distributed by 1100 hours. Pemberton received patrol coordinates 1 kilometer north of the actual route. Farwell received coordinates 2 kilometers east. Aldridge received the exact grid Elena would walk. The logic was clean. Whoever's coordinates produced enemy contact identified the source. Elena spent the afternoon on her equipment, checking the rifle and her sidearm with the focused attention of someone who understood that tonight depended entirely on a variable she could not control. She could control her positioning, her discipline, her response to whatever the darkness produced. She could not control which of 3 people had decided for reasons she did not yet know to sell information that cost soldiers their lives. Faye found her at 1600. "You don't have to do this." That's the second time today someone has said that. Maybe it's true both times. Maybe. Elena checked the chamber on her sidearm. "But if I don't walk that route tonight, we never identify the source. And if we never identify the source, the next operation Phantom runs gets ambushed the same way. And the one after that." She holstered the weapon. "This is the job." Faye was quiet. Then, "Come back." 2 words. No decoration. They were the right 2 words. The desert at night had become familiar to Elena. The way difficult things become familiar when you have moved through them enough to stop being surprised, not comfortable, not safe, but known. She walked the patrol route alone, rifle at the ready, senses open to everything. The overwatch element was positioned Harker and two phantom operators on elevated ground with sightlines to her route. She could not see them. She was not meant to. Their presence was a fact she carried rather than a comfort she could verify. The first 15 minutes produced nothing but silence and wind. At the 20-minute mark, she reached the coordinates that only Aldridge had received. She heard them before she saw them. Movement north, the sound of people trying to move quietly and not entirely succeeding. The occasional scrape of boot on rock. The deliberate spacing of a tactical approach. She dropped behind cover without breaking stride, the motion fluid and automatic. Through her night vision, she counted the shapes. 5, possibly 6. Oriented on exactly the position the false briefing had specified. Not the general area, the specific position. The grid that only Aldridge had received. She keyed her radio twice. A single click of acknowledgement from Harker. What followed took 4 minutes and felt like 40. She suppressed the lead element as Harker's overwatch collapsed on the contact from 3 directions. The enemy fighters, finding themselves outflanked by a force they had not anticipated, made the decision trained soldiers make when the tactical situation becomes untenable. 2 attempted to withdraw. 1 was taken down, the other captured. 3 were secured at the contact point. The valley went quiet. The evidence was simple and complete. The coordinates had produced enemy contact. The coordinates had come from one person. Aldridge was not in his quarters when the MPs went to find him. He was in the operations room, sitting at a table in the dark, hands flat on the surface, making no attempt to hide, to run, or to construct a narrative that might delay the inevitable. When the overhead lights came on and the MPs filled the doorway, he looked at them with an expression that Elena, watching from the corridor, would spend a long time trying to accurately name. Not guilt, not defiance, not the performance of remorse. Relief. The exhausted relief of a person who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has finally been permitted to set it down. He was handcuffed without resistance. He did not speak. He looked straight ahead as he was escorted past Elena in the corridor, and for a single moment his eyes found hers. She had expected something accusatory in that look, or ashamed, or the calculating assessment of someone running a final odds calculation. What she found instead was a man whose face had been worn down to something essential by 8 months of doing something that destroyed everything he had built in service of the only thing that mattered more than what he was destroying. He was taken to the secure facility on the base's southern edge. The door closed behind him. Elena stood in the corridor and listened to the silence for a moment. Then she walked toward the operations room because there was nothing else to do with the next few minutes, and the next few minutes would not benefit from being spent alone. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. Elena was not present. She sat in the operations room with Harker and Strand, and the weapons technical report spread across the table, and waited. Pruitt came in at 0400 with the summary in his hand and a face that had moved past tiredness into something without a clean name. He sat down. He confessed, Pruitt said. All of it. The full timeline. 8 months. Intelligence transfers weapons, pipeline details, contact protocols, drop sites, the network structure, as far as he understood it. He set the summary on the table. He started talking and did not stop. Nobody spoke. His wife and son were taken 7 months ago. Pruitt continued. Cody, 9 years old. A criminal network with foreign intelligence connections, the same network his handlers used to apply pressure. He came to us first, filed a report through standard channels 6 months ago. He paused, his jaw tightened. The report was buried, third layer of administration. Nobody followed up, nobody called him back. He waited 4 weeks for a response that never came. Another pause. Then he made the only decision he believed he had. The room absorbed this. His family, Harker said. FBI coordinated with local law enforcement based on intelligence Aldridge provided in his confession. His wife and son were extracted from a property outside Tucson at 1:17 this morning. Both alive. The boy has a broken arm. They are at a hospital in Arizona. The silence shifted. Not lighter. Changed. Elena thought about Aldridge's face in the corridor. The relief in it. Relief in about a man who had spent 8 months doing something that cost him everything he had built in service of people he could not protect any other way, in a system that had failed to protect them when he had asked it to. She did not excuse it. She could not excuse it. She understood it. That was the part she had not been prepared for. not the moral complexity as an abstraction. She had encountered that in training. She had not been prepared for what it felt like to understand something she could not excuse, to hold both things simultaneously without resolution. The first question he asked, Pruitt said almost to himself when we confirmed his family was safe. He looked at the summary. He asked if Cody's arm had been set properly. Nobody answered. Strand said the network being dismantled. The intelligence Aldridge provided is substantial. It will take time. Pruitt looked at Strand. Phantom's operational security improved significantly from this point. He stood. Get some sleep. He looked at Elena last. You did the job, Voss. Whatever comes next, you did the job. She nodded once. Some moments were not improved by additional words. Beckett's room in the medical facility smelled of antiseptic, and the particular warmth of buildings kept too hot for their healthy occupants. He was sitting up when she arrived. Pale in a way that did not suit him, the left side of his face shadowed with bruising, working through its color spectrum toward resolution. But his eyes were the same, that stillness, a complete interior quiet that came from somewhere deeper than training. He did not greet her. He looked at the rifle case she was carrying. She set it on the chair beside his bed, unlatched it, and opened it. The rifle was in the condition she had received it and maintained it cleaned after each use. The scope protected the action, checked and rechecked. He reached out and ran one hand along the stock with the tactile attention of someone reacquainting themselves with something that had been part of them. Holst told me about the fighter at 2 meters, he said. She said nothing. That is the one that stays with you, he said, not the long shots. The long shots are physics and patience, and they get cleaner over time with better technique. The one up close stays because there is nothing between you and what it means. No glass, no distance, no geometry. He looked at her. You know that now. Yes. I've been thinking about your training officer, she said. Durbin. He wrote that I was too analytical, too prone to hesitation under simulated pressure. He was wrong about the second part. He was not wrong about the first part. No, something in Beckett's expression updated itself. But analytical is not a liability in this role. It is the baseline. What you add to it is what matters. He paused. You added something. I don't know what to call it yet, but it is there. He withdrew his hand from the rifle. Keep it, he said. She looked at him. The rifle, keep it for now. I will not be operational for 8 weeks minimum, and the unit needs a designated marksman. He looked at the ceiling. Don't scratch it. She picked up the case. Go do something useful, he said. I am trying to sleep. Harker found her on the range at 0700 the following morning. She had been there since 0530, working through drills she had designed herself based on the gaps she had identified in her own performance. The water tower engagement, the suppression with limited ammunition, the moments where she had been fast enough and the moments where fast enough had been insufficient. She heard him approach and did not look up from the scope. He stood beside her for a moment watching. Then he pulled over the range stool and sat. You disobeyed a direct order, he said. You commandeered a vehicle without authorization. You inserted yourself into a combat operation for which you had no assignment and no business being present. He paused. Any one of those things is grounds for disciplinary action. All of them together is grounds for a court-martial. She fired. The 800-meter target took the round in the upper chest, not center mass. She noted the deviation. Wind shifted, she said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I am not done. She chambered another round. You made a decision under conditions that do not permit good decisions. You made it alone with incomplete information in the dark, with equipment you were not qualified to use. His voice carried only the weight of the words themselves, nothing extra. And the decision was correct. Not because it produced a good outcome. Outcomes do not validate decisions made with incomplete information. It was correct because it was made for the right reason. She lowered the rifle and looked at him. I have been carrying something for 22 years, he said. An operation, a decision made with incomplete information that I believed was correct. It was not. 3 people died because of it, not because I was reckless, because I was wrong. He looked at the range. I know the difference between a decision that was wrong and a decision that was right. You were right. She waited. That is not forgiveness for the regulations you violated, he said. Those have their own process and their own consequences. He stood. You are going to keep training, not because you are deficient, because you are not deficient enough yet to know where your deficiencies are, which is more dangerous than being obviously bad at something. He moved toward the range exit. Harker. He stopped but did not turn. Thank you for the 36 hours. A moment passed. You did the work, he said. I just stood there and confirmed what you already knew. He left. She turned back to the range and fired again. Center mass this time. The ceremony happened at 1600 hours on a Tuesday, which was not the kind of day ceremonies were supposed to happen, and which made it feel paradoxically more real. The full complement of FOB Sandridge assembled in dress uniform on the parade ground. The sun was at the angle it reached in late afternoon, not brutal but insistent, the kind of desert light that found everything and left nothing in shadow. Before it began, Pruitt found her off to the side. He handed her a single sheet, a formal letter of counseling, signed and dated documenting her unauthorized vehicle use and unsanctioned combat insertion. The penalties were administrative. The record would carry them permanently. He did not explain or apologize. He handed her the paper the way a man hands over a bill that was always going to arrive. She signed it, folded it, and put it in her left breast pocket. One document that said she had broken the rules. A second she knew, still coming from Vance, that said something else entirely. Two different kinds of accounting for the same 3 days. Pruitt stood at the podium. He was not a man who made speeches for their own sake. When he spoke, it was because the words were necessary and not for any other reason. Specialist Voss made a decision, he said. In the middle of a night when this base was under attack and our options had contracted to almost nothing, she made a decision that the regulations of this service explicitly prohibited. She will bear the administrative record of that permanently. She also made a decision that kept 12 operators alive who would otherwise not be standing here today. He paused. These two facts exist simultaneously. They do not cancel each other out. In this work, we ask people to make decisions in conditions that don't permit clean answers. Sometimes they rise to it. The cost of rising to it is always borne in the body and the memory and carried forward. Specialist Voss bore that cost and will continue to bear it. He stepped to where she stood and pinned the bronze star to her chest. The medal was small and heavy and felt like what it was, a recorded fact. Not a resolution, a recorded fact about 3 days she would spend a long time accounting for. She had not spent 6 months imagining this moment. She had spent 6 months counting ammunition. The medal felt like the weight of both of those things pressed into a single piece of metal. Behind Pruitt, against the far edge of the formation, she could see Harker. He was looking not at her, but at the base memorial wall, the board where the photographs of Phoebe Sandridge's casualties were mounted. His expression held what his expression always held, the weight of what he was carrying. No more, no less. She looked at him for a moment. Then Strand was in front of her with a transfer document and a handshake that carried no sentiment and a great deal of meaning. Sergeant Voss, he said, designated marksman, phantom shadow. He shook her hand once firmly and moved on to the next thing. No ceremony in it, no welcome speech. No acknowledgement that anyone's assessment of her had been wrong. The unit absorbed her the way water absorbs a new tributary, not with celebration, but with the quiet adjustment of something expanding to its natural shape. She stood in the desert light with the bronze star on her chest and the rank of sergeant and the title she had not sought, and felt none of the things she had imagined she would feel if this moment ever arrived. What she felt instead had no clean name. The weight of the face at 2 meters. Aldridge in the corridor, looking relieved. Beckett asking if the rifle was scratched before asking about himself. Harker saying, I know the difference between a decision that was wrong and a decision that was right. All of it present simultaneously. All of it carried forward. This was what the other side of invisible looked like. Agent Vance was waiting outside the operations building as the ceremony dispersed. Same neutral clothing, same quality of studied attention. She was holding a manila envelope. Elena stopped. Vance did not offer pleasantries. She held out the envelope. I found the source of the modification in your service record, she said. It required 3 weeks of database forensics and a clearance elevation I had to formally request for this investigation. A pause. The account that made the modification was deactivated 14 months before you enlisted. It was used once for this specific change, and then it went permanently dark. Elena looked at the envelope. The clearance level of the account is above my current authorization to investigate further, Vance continued. What that means in practical terms is that whoever did this had access to systems at a level I am not permitted to examine, or they borrowed that access from someone who did and covered the trail. She looked at Elena directly. What was removed from your record based on the metadata of the deletion appears to be approximately 14 months of documented training history. Where that training occurred, who conducted it, what it covered, the content is gone. Only the shape of where it was remains. Elena took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, a string of numbers and letters, a case file reference that meant nothing to her without context. If you want to know what you are, Vance said, that is where you start. She paused. I don't know what you'll find. I don't know if it will make sense of the last 3 days or complicate them further. A longer pause. I suspect the latter. Elena looked at the paper. 14 months. A clean deletion. An account that had gone dark before she had ever stood in a processing line at basic training. Before she had made any choice about what her life would be. Someone had decided what she was before she had decided it herself. Why are you giving this to me? She asked. Vance was quiet for a moment. Because you earned the right to know what questions to ask, she said, even if I cannot provide the answers. She left without waiting for a response. Elena stood in the desert light with the paper in her hand and the counseling letter in her left breast pocket and the bronze star on her chest and the rifle case over her shoulder. 4 things. 4 different weights. 4 different kinds of accounting for who she was and what she had done and what she did not yet know about either of those things. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in her right breast pocket. She walked toward the barracks. Faye was on the steps when she arrived. The sun was finishing its work with the horizon burning through colors that seemed excessive for the environment, oranges and deep reds in a brief specific violet that existed for perhaps 4 minutes before the darkness finished arriving. The desert cooling rapidly in the way it always did, as though it had been holding its breath all day and had finally exhaled. Elena sat down beside her. They did not speak for a while. The base settled into its evening rhythms around them, generators at their constant frequency. The smell of dinner from the chow hall reaching them on the cooling air. Somewhere across the compound, someone laughed at something genuine, unguarded, the kind of sound a base produced in the hours between operations when the machinery of readiness stood down just enough for people to remember they were people. Aldridge's son, Faye said. His arm was set properly. He is stable. Elena nodded. They're saying Aldridge faces maximum prosecution. I know. He asked about you, through his attorney. He wanted to know if you made it back. Elena looked out at the ridgeline where the last of the color was going. Why? I don't know, Faye said. Maybe he needed to know that not everything he did ended badly, that something survived. She was quiet for a moment. Or maybe he just needed one thing to be all right. Elena thought about that. About the arithmetic of what people chose when all their options were bad, and the only remaining question was which loss they could survive carrying. About the fact that surviving the carrying was not the same as being right. About the fact that understanding something was not the same as forgiving it. About the fact that she would think about Grant Aldridge for a long time, possibly for the rest of her life, in the specific way you think about things that refuse to resolve into simple categories. Not because he deserved sympathy, and not because he did not. Because he was human, and what he had done was human, and the humans it had cost were also human, and none of that arithmetic ever came out clean. The envelope, Faye said, glancing at Elena's breast pocket. From Vance. What's in it? Elena was quiet for a moment. A question, she said finally, about what I am. Faye looked at her. What are you going to do with it? Elena looked at the ridgeline. The color was entirely gone now. The darkness had taken over, clean, complete, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it over the past 3 days. Ask me after the next one, she said. Faye was quiet. The generators hummed. The stars appeared in the sequence. They always appeared, the bright ones first, then the fainter ones filling in behind them until the sky was entirely populated with ancient light that had traveled incomprehensible distances to land here. Elena sat with all of it. The metal, the counseling letter, the envelope, the rifle case. She did not try to resolve it. Resolution was not what this required. What it required was exactly what she had always done, the willingness to carry the inventory accurately, to track what was there and what it weighed and what it pieced, and to keep working anyway. After a while, she stood. Faye did not ask where she was going. Elena crossed the compound toward the operations building where Strand's light was still burning in the window. She opened the door. He looked up from his maps without expression. She set the rifle case on the table. He moved one of the maps to make room. She pulled up a chair. That was enough. In this world, that was everything, showing up to the next thing with what you had, which was never exactly what you wished for, and was always exactly what was available. Outside, the desert held its silence the way it always had, without judgment, without comfort, without any opinion at all about the people moving through it. The darkness was complete. The stars burned on. The base breathed around its generators and its routines and its ongoing business of preparing for the next thing and the thing after that. Strand said briefing at 0600. I'll be here, she said. She had always been here. The difference now was that everyone else knew it too. The light burned on.